Hello again, masters of the Genie, if you will. It's myself, Jonathan, also known as the PC Genie. Now, I'm going to be answering some of the questions you guys have asked in my 300 question video that obviously hasn't been nearly fulfilled yet. So, someone asked me, how do you make a living to fund your weapons extravaganza? Firstly, I like the term weapons extravaganza. I might use that in the future. Secondly, until just a few days ago, literally, at the time of making this, of course, I was working in a call centre doing after-sales work. So people would call in about faulty electricals and yell at me and moan at me and complain at me and insult me, and I'd get paid for listening to them rant. That basically was my job. And because it was, it's the sort of thing that gives you nightmares in the end, where you start dreaming of people, yelling and complaining at you over literally nonsense like, what am I going to do? My iPad's broken. I can't live without it. Actual example. In fact, multiple actual examples. So yeah, I've quit that job now, but I'm going to be getting another job soon. I've already got an interview lined up today, actually, just after making this video. Don't know how that'll go. Can't see in the future. But in terms of an expansion to that, of course, there's the initial job itself that was full-time, but I'd go on top of that to say there's a strong degree of budgeting involved, because, you imagine with a lot of people, I'd sort of say to them, whenever they ask me, how do you afford all these weapons and armour and things, I sort of say, that time when you went to the pub and got quite a few drinks with your friends and had a great time? Discount that, I didn't do it. I've only been out to pubs to have drinks a couple of times in my life. Too expensive. And, remember that time when you paid to go to a theme park and have lots of rides? Discount it, I didn't do that. Or imagine that really fancy car that you bought, discount it, I'm going for everything cheap. Remember that time you bought, and so on and so forth, cheap food, whatever's nutritious and filling, going to places and trying to get the best deals and browsing around and bartering over things until I get the cheapest from everything. And even on things like the pole arm bill hook thing I got, I was getting a group deal of multiple things, like a draw knife as well, and actually bartered with the guy, maybe because I've played too many merchant-based games and watched far too much Bargain Hunt and those sorts of television programs. But those sorts of things, it makes me realise that you can, make efforts to try and, draw more out of your money. So hence, with that, I've been able to save up enough that at times I've been able to buy weapons. Another thing I do is I browse a lot. So, you see things like my Brigandine armour, which I demonstrate in a video. That cost me a couple of £100, but I didn't immediately go out there, and as soon as I saw it, I went, buying it, got it. I literally browsed it and looked at other examples at different prices, other than Steel Mastery, where I got my final piece, literally for about a year or so, before I actually committed to any decision to buy it. I carefully chose what I was going to buy. So thus I have only a few decisions I ever actually regret from purchasing. But most of the time I've carefully looked and gone on recommendations and all those things, and then made a final absolute choice on what I was going to buy. So thus, every time I have needed to spend money or have chosen to buy luxuries, like the swords I've got, my extravaganza, I made sure I was 100% certain I wanted those things, and I got the correct deal. So yeah, hence, with that sort of budgeting, as much as it can drive people insane, micromanaging this bit of money, that bit here, it pays off, because in the end you've got enough stocked after some time going towards weapons. Another thing on that I'd say is it's worth directly saving. So on that, for example, I set aside a certain amount of money per month that only goes towards savings. So other things that can be disposable, food, drink, transport, whatever, but you have an amount of money you can save, so that if you want to buy luxuries later, like swords, armour, or even a fancy car or a house, you've got that money set aside. Because if you just have it floating in your bank account, it's all too easy to just instinctively spend it on something and then it's gone again. Kind of like in that movie Up, where they just kept smashing the piggy bank to get the change again, and then when they wanted to buy a luxury holiday or something like that, the money was gone still. It's that same concept. So, sorry for ranting on a general budgeting lesson, but that's the answer in short and long, how I'm able to afford all these weapons, despite not being a silver spoon type of lad. Yeah, so the next question, someone was asking me, it might be a stupid question. Actually, no, I think it's quite an interesting one. It's quite fun to answer. If I ever get letters and things, would I use a sword to open them? Well, now it is time for an instructional video. Ladies and gentlemen, here I have a sword, which of course I shall be using, and I have some mail. Whoops, sorry, wrong one. Here I have some mail. This is from my ex-employer, so I'll just use that as an example. So, for recommended technique, in fact, well, basically, this will be interesting showing it to the camera, but what I usually do is, normally there's a sealed part, so sort of two layers. You've got the back, the actual top of the envelope, then you've got the other bit, which is where the adhesive, whatever, has stuck it all down. And there's a gap in between. You just put your sword in, through the middle like this, and you have to sort of push it along, and you're going to cause some rips and things along the way. It always happens, but it doesn't matter, because in this case you probably don't care about the envelope, just the contents. This is why I often recommend to maybe start with a single-edged sword, because you don't want to cut up the contents inside. And watch for stabs as well. I've not done it yet, but I recommend angling it so that if you are going to poke through, you poke through the material in the envelope and not stab a really important letter from the bank or something. But basically I go along from this. This is one of the things that you learn in historical European martial arts, that one of the good things about swords, as opposed to using axes or maces or things like that, is the draw cut. So you start from here, you don't need to make a swing or an impact or something. I'd recommend never doing that for any packages or boxes if you want the contents. You start with the blade already there basically, and then do a slicing cut. Draw it out, and just while you're pulling, so you've got two motions, pulling it along, that up-down type of thing, well usually down, and then that slight sort of push forwards as well, away from you, which I'd recommend for safety. You don't want the sword going in your face. Also to allow it to stay taut and slice through. So here we are. In fact, I'll get that closer to the camera so you guys can see. I'll remove the contents because they're private and confidential from my previous workplace. But as you can see, one single motion has sliced it the way through, and without the contents getting damaged. So yes, this isn't my first rodeo. I have indeed opened many packages and boxes with swords. In fact, usually anyone who sees me doing that, like my parents and whatnot, often they're saying, "Johnny, why don't you just get a knife or something and done?" Because it's fun to open boxes and things with swords. It's as simple as that. So, in terms of the next question, it was an interesting one. Someone had asked me. I can imagine it was probably just almost a childish intention, a little fun thing. But when you really seriously think about it, it's such a dark and disturbing question. Are you ready? Grit your teeth. Hold your breath. Ready? Would you rather have a toe for a tongue, or tongues for toes? It's probably just would you rather have a toe for a tongue or tongues for toes? Yeah, but I sat there and thought, when you think about it, that's grim. Because think about it. Option one, you have tongues for toes. Now imagine all those times when someone says, "Oh, you've got smelly feet" and those things, and you're basically tasting what you walk on, or even when you've got shoes and socks on, you still get bits of grit and dirt and sometimes little insects and things depending on where you walk and those sorts of things, and your sweat. But you'd be tasting it. It'd be essentially like you're constantly licking that dirt. That's horrible. I can imagine you'd be constantly afraid to step outdoors, and you'd be needing to sterilise your feet all the time to make sure you don't get these foul tastes, and you'd have to have like toothpaste coating you and have a specialised layer and maybe put plastic on so you can keep that layer, and then add your shoes and socks on top of that and hope for the best and maybe have some horrible moments. Or option B, you can have a toe for a tongue, and then it'd be like trying to explain colours to a blind person. Oh yes, this Marmite tastes like this, or this is how toast tastes like, or a chunk of beef, yeah. But to this person who's got a toe for a tongue, they will never know the experience of tasting food. Horrid. To be honest, I'd probably go for the lesser of two evils. I would go for a toe for a tongue, because at least although I'd be quite miserable in never knowing the taste of decent food, at least I could experience, at least I could go through life normally and do the things I do at work, martial arts, and maybe go out with friends and have a chat or play on computer games without constantly feeling in pain or horrid because of weird feet tastes. It's the lesser of two evils. Though I must say, it would be very interesting to watch someone cutting their toenail. They'd be like, ugh, gotcha. Need a very good mirror for that one. That grim one aside, the next one was, someone asked me, what in general is your favourite type of weapon? Now, it's an interesting one, because I kind of quite like a lot of weapons for lots of different purposes. In fact, I've not got everything I want. Hang on. Here we are, proper demonstration piece. Because, as I say, I've got multiple sort of answers in that. So in terms of a general category, my favourite sort of weapon, I'd say in general, though it sort of depends on my mood, is the bow. So if you go into those broad types of categories, then something like this is an American flat bow. It's a 45-pound draw weight. So it's on the lighter end, but I like it. Got a nice arrow shelf. So with this, of course, you've got a bow, and it's a very good ranged weapon. It can set an arrow in a good distance. I prefer it. Of course, I don't fight in war, so I'm not thinking most practical weapon, but my favourite weapon. So compared to firearms, you've got that drop, but unlike with something like a sniper rifle, where you'd have a spotter and someone to watch the drop and do all those calculations, when you are an archer and you draw and you loose, and then you see it go across the distance, it's very plain to see. You don't, unless the arrow goes very far away and you basically start to lose sight of it, even for that, you can still see the trajectory of the arrow, and in that sense, it's really fun to watch. If you're doing something like a flight shoot, which is see how far you can get your arrow simply. If you're doing something like a clout shoot, which is you've got a flag off somewhere in the distance, you've got to do an aerial shot of your arrow and then have it land as close to the flag as possible and get lots of points. Or popinjay, where you've got these sort of coconuts on a stand and instinctively loose and knock them off the pedestals. All of those things, I admit, they'd be great fun with guns. A lot of them, obviously some of them like clout and field shoots you can't really do, but they'd be quite fun with guns and other things like crossbows as well. But I don't know, I've always found that they're so much more fun to me when using a bow, because again, you can watch the flight of the arrow. You've got, with guns, you see slow motion footage where you can see someone maybe shooting through a ballistic gel torso and that explosive effect, but when you've got something like a bow, you've still got power in it, because despite the weight of the projectile, there's that inertia, so the power of the bow, especially on a strong draw weight, about 60 pounds or up, you can actually tell and even feel the pure power in the shot, and you can see it in action, because it's a slower projectile. So rather than needing a slow motion camera every time, whether you're on a field shoot or some basic targets, you can see the shot happen. And although slow motion would make it even easier to see, and you can see even more details of bits splitting apart and that sort of thing, you still get to a degree, see the shot really nicely and hear it with a bow. So, you know, you take your aim, you draw loose, and see that projectile, you know, sear through the air, impact the target and make that massive BAM type of sound. And also you don't need ear defenders, so you can actually listen to it properly as well. So yeah, in that general sense, I'd say the bow is absolutely my favourite type of weapon. Apart from that though, in terms of close combat, I generally prefer swords. The reason I prefer swords over other, you know, close combat weapons is because they've got an edge all along them. You know, you've got, so if you're close up or you made a strike and it was doing a draw strike, you know, drawing cut, and you hit quite close to the hilt or right at the very tip, doesn't matter, you do some slicing action. Also, you don't need to be strong to use a sword, so if I pick up a sword, this is what I'm going to go into in a minute, pick up a sword, do the cuts. You don't have to be monstrously strong to wield it. You don't have to be monstrously strong to hit something and do some decent damage. You know, I've seen, you know, people who think, oh, they're really weak and, you know, practically stick figures, and, you know, they pick up a sword that's something like test cutting, slice at a bottle, and you see that lovely action if they get the angle right and the cut correct. So then it becomes technique, and then you see it perfectly slice a target open without needing to strength train for decades in order to do so. Plus, of course, with them being so light, they're fast, so all the movies and things you see with swords, I mean, imagine if you had a felling action and people going woof and smashing things. You can have that dramatic effect, but if you want to see something really fast-paced, you know, action-packed, they'd just be going back to guns again. You wouldn't see any musketeers or anything. Musketeers with axes. Wait there, wait there, wait there. Ugh. As opposed to, oh, you trying to thrust me? Nope. Done. So, nice fast weapons. It makes them very nice. And just, I mean, the shiny things. Call me a magpie, but swords are shiny. And shiny things are good. Okay? Shiny things are good. But, in terms of more specifics, one thing I'd like to mention is one of my favourite types of sword is what this is based on. This is one by Hanway. It's not the greatest quality, but it's still pretty good. It's a mortuary sword. Now this is one from around the 1600s, so I mean you actually mentioned in a comment that you know, not just medieval things, fair point. In this case it's actually from the Renaissance period, so that's actually just following from the medieval period, and where they'd seen guns take over the battlefield, so not like muskets or, you know, those high quality ones, but arquebuses and muskets and, well, as in matchlock types of guns that were a lot more improvised looking than the sorts of things you'd see today or even a couple of 100 years ago. But there were still quite a few reasons to keep swords, especially as backup weapons, whether you were a pikeman, whether you were a cavalryman, or whether you were a gunner and you wanted something to defend yourself in close combat, if you could afford a sword. And this mortuary sword is my favourite design amongst those, because of the basket hilted swords, a lot of things like sabres, they've got a basket that goes sort of cover the hand on the front, sometimes on a knuckle brow as it's called. Sometimes you see them covering, if you're right-handed, the right part of your hand, so almost in a 90-degree protection from in front to your right, and of course vice versa if you're left-handed. Ones like this have got 180-degree protection. And believe me, when you're doing sparring and someone's aiming for your hands, I do quite a bit admittedly, it's a nice thing to have. 180-degree protection. So you can only get struck around the back, and that means your hands are a lot safer, even without having as much, well, protection on there. So then you can keep more dexterous without having to wear heavy gauntlets or gloves, and still be confident while sparring. Also, I like fullering on swords, and a lot of the examples I've seen from museums for mortuary swords have got things like triple fullering and all sorts of amazing looks like that. This one here has one deep fillet that goes partly along the blade. I don't prefer that as much, but there you go. Also they're double-edged, Now, I've always preferred double-edged swords over single-edged swords because you can do things like certain sort of back cuts, and also, well, you can do things like a bind, so you're making sure you've got your true edge on there and you've got your strength in to make sure you've got a good structure, and then sort of sweep back of your cut. Or even just go for thrust, and it helps having the edge on both sides. And even just generally, if you grappled in and went around behind their neck and went, Shia! You don't have to suddenly go, oh, hang on, buddy, turn the sword in, true edge in, and then all of that. You just got two edges. You just go back, slice, done. Simple. So yeah, those are the kinds of reasons why I really like the mortuary sword. It's the kind of sword where you could be a civilian, you just have one of these. If you're trained in swordsmanship, you can do cut and thrust techniques with these, have confident hand protection, so you don't need to be heavily armoured, and you've got a straight edge, so that's something I prefer personally as well. Got a double edge, so any of those techniques involving the reverse edge you can do, and the whole way along the blade, not like some sabres which have partial reverse edges and that sort of thing, hence the name short edge in those cases. And then the following, so it's a thrust able, thrust capable swords, better than things like migration era swords, but it's pretty good, well, but it's cut centric, so it's better for my favourite type of fighting, because I'm rubbish at thrusting and I'm much better at cutting, but I still have the choice to thrust if I want to. So yeah, that sort of answers that. Now, another interesting one. Someone asked me if you had to fight. I don't know if it's just a typo. Call me pedantic. He said, "Daddy or Daddy?" Probably Daddy. So I figured if I had to face my dad in a trial by combat, what weapon would I use? If it was going for my real life father, and I must be honest about this, I specifically choose to be unarmed, because if there's any chance I could go through some mandatory trial by combat and do unarmed and get a solid victory, such as maybe grappling in and manipulating the shoulders and that sort of thing, and then do a throw to the floor, it'll hurt, but I can control it and you won't die. So hence I prefer to if it was that kind of one-on-one fight where I had to go against someone I loved and cared about, such as my own father, I'd choose unarmed so I could have the most minimal risk possible of causing them any serious harm. If we're talking about actually a fight at 1v1 on a stranger, I would probably want something more like this, which is a two-handed sword. Now, the reason why I prefer to fight with a two-handed sword, despite earlier saying I'd actually use a mortuary sword, as a favourite weapon, is because if my life depended on it, and I must win for whatever reason, be it to gain, some financial reward, or be it to actually save my life, or something like that, I'd go with something I know I'm going to win with more likely. And I'm not as good with things like sabres and single-handed swords, even though they're my favourites. My all-time favourite style is sword and buckler, yet it's one of the things I'm still trying to come to grips with. This is something I've been training with, and I have practiced in sparring with a lot. So I know if I went into a one-on-one fight, and we both had two-handed swords, whether they are good at that as well, or whether they were terrible at it, or somewhere in between, then that's fine. At least I know I can be confident and able to use this properly, and know all the techniques and tactics about using a two-handed sword. So that's why I prefer things like arming swords and mortuary swords and that sort of thing for general practice. But if right at this point in time I had to go into a one-on-one fight, I could choose the weapon, two-handed sword, best thing I'm trained in, go for what's safe. Okay, yeah, sorry that was so long, but simple questions can have quite loaded answers, can't they? And I'll answer a few more soon, but thanks for your time, and enjoy yourselves, guys.